Good morning and welcome. Well, it is 2 o'clock, and with that, let's get started. I'd like to thank you all for attending today as we put on part of the Black Business Professional Association. We put on another event to support the community going forward. Specifically today, we are part of the BBPA Level Up Finance and Funding Masterclass for the Black-led businesses. However, before we get into that business, let's start off with a land acknowledgement, at least for where we represent. The land acknowledgement, the Black Business and Professional Association acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The BBPA also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed by the Mississauga of the Credit and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississauga and Credit Chippewa bands. Now, I would like to introduce special guest Michael Pinnock, treasurer of the BBPA, and special guest of the day is David Watt, our chief economist from Canada, HSBC. Just give a quick wave out there, a quick wave so people can recognize you. I'll be speaking a little bit more, both of them will be speaking more shortly. As well, I would like to acknowledge some of our special guests / teammates from the BBPA. We have Nadine Spencer, our president, BBPA. We have Francis DeSaul, executive director. We have Ross Kadas, our VP. And we have Tanisha Smith, our marketing specialist. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Nadine Spencer to give her a few words to introduce our program. Nadine Spencer and Mr. Michael Pinnock.
Is my president there? So while we wait on the president to come, on behalf of the BBP, I'd like to say a big welcome and thank you. I can see as we speak, there are 33 persons in the chat. We suggest to me when we remove the other guest speakers and players, there are at least 26 or so that are folks who have joined us for this inaugural financial literacy program that we hope will make a big impact in our community. I'd also like to say thanks in advance to RBC and HSBC and the estate of the late Donald Reed for providing the funding so that we can deliver this program. I will just take the opportunity at this time to, while I wait on the president, just to outline that this is a 13 weeks program and it's designed to capture sort of cradle to grave approach to running a business. So for the next 13 weeks, we'll be looking at conceptually, what is it you need to know to start a business? We start out today with, let's look at scan the environment, look at the economy, how it's shaping up and how we can get those ideas working within the confines of the realities that we face. We move into what sort of form of business we should have to do this stuff. It's a incorporated business, it's a partnership business, it's the sole proprietorship. Then we move into finance and funding. What are some of the sources and how we can do it? We wrap up into the marketing and eventually our bookkeeping and accounts.
Michael, just want to stop you for a quick second there because Nadine is now with us.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful.
Good afternoon, Madam President.
Hi, good afternoon, Anton. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm always happy to have our treasurer speak because he's amazing. He's the cornerstone and foundation of the brilliant outline that we all see here. So thank you so much, Michael.
You're most welcome, my president.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Level Up. The BBPA is very thrilled, and the treasurer mentioned our partners, RBC, HSBC, the Donald Reed Estate, who have invested in this program. And an investment in this program is an investment in the future of Black entrepreneurs, Black business people, Black professionals. And this initiative came out of a survey that we did very earlier on when COVID started. We did a survey in comparing mainstream businesses with Black businesses. And what we recognized was that there was a gap. And that gap had to do with capital, it had to do with structure, foundations, and all of the pillars, the key and core pillars that we need to make businesses succeed. And so our brilliant treasurer looked at the landscape of what entrepreneurs need for success, Black entrepreneurs, and came up with 13 weeks of what we have identified as key strategies and key steps for Black entrepreneurs in this financial level up series. So we look forward to working with you each and every week, with all the participants and the speakers that will be here each and every week to work together as we level up. And what we do in the Black business community is not just beneficial to our growth, but it's also beneficial to the growth of the economy and to all of Canada. So it is a win-win for everybody. So I thank you very much, and we look forward to the conversations, the dialogue, and do not hesitate to reach out. Michael Pinnock, he is a brilliant finance person. He absolutely is. And the list we've curated, we'll have different speakers, one that we have here today, all brilliant people that we can pull from and draw from and broaden our network and broaden our reach. We do have a video. Tanisha, do you have the clip? Are we gonna share that? So I'm just gonna lead you right now into our promo for Level Up.
As we seem to have a little bit of challenge in terms of the volume, we'll just give us a few seconds as we work some of those kinks out.
We'll let it go through, and you can look and you'll see the 13 weeks. If you go to the website as well, the entire program is built out, and we will have this running on our various sites and in our social media, and you'll be able to see and hear. Oh, there it is now. Thank you, Tanisha. And I will turn it back over now to Anton.
Can you hear me? There we go. There we go. Well, sorry about that quick delay there for a quick second there. Madam President, I thank you very much. This is definitely the beginning of an exciting program, particularly for those that are looking to transition and get a better understanding of what we can do and how to really engage. With that, let's start it off with a big understanding of who we are, where we're going. Today, as our special guest, we have David Watt. David Watt is the Chief Economist for Canada for HSBC. David started his career at HSBC, been there since May 2012 as a chief economist. David brings nearly 20 years of experience in Canada's financial sector to HSBC. In his role, David is responsible for HSBC Bank of Canada economic forecast, with a focus on bringing HSBC's strong global economic research to his Canadian clients. David brings his past experience as an economist, a currency strategist, and as a fixed income strategist to his current position at HSBC. David started his career at the Bank of Canada, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, and other Canadian financial institutions. David holds a Master's of Economics from Queen's University, where he also undertook advanced graduate studies. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I give you David Watt.
Make sure I'm off mute. All right. Thank you very much for the introduction. And thank you very much for the invitation to present here. I will say usually when I do presentations, I have a number of charts and graphs. Unfortunately, I don't have a chart package ready right now. So if you see me look down, it's so that I can go over some of my notes that I have to make sure that I cover all the topics that are relevant. Now, right now, when we think about the economy, what's going on, whether it's Canada or globally, there's obviously two competing factors that are driving how we assess the outlook. One is, of course, pandemic and the increasing rate of infection, especially in Ontario and Quebec, where we're seeing increasingly stringent lockdowns that we're all dealing with right now. And the other part is the vaccines that are now rolling out, that have been rolling out since late last year. Now, the pandemic is going to remain a short-term driver. It was a driver, obviously, last spring, and it'll be a driver through this spring until we start getting the sense of, okay, when will we reach herd immunity, which is when will enough people have the vaccine that we can honestly say the pandemic is in the rearview mirror. Now, we don't reach herd immunity until we get 50 to 90% vaccinated, which in Canada, based on the rollout, looks like it might happen sometime in Q3. We'd hoped it would be early Q3, but more likely it will be later in Q3. So what we're going to see is the first half of the year will face some headwinds. We could have negative GDP growth in the first quarter. Pandemic might begin to ease a little bit through the second quarter, some easing of restrictions, but then it's really the second half of the year when we're going to expect to see that ramp up of pent up demand. We won't be as strong as it was in 2020, but it will help provide a foundation for the Canadian economy to grow into next year. And very similar trends going on globally. Some countries might come out of it a little quicker, but the idea is that the second half of the year is going to be better than the first half, and that'll provide us some momentum going into 2022. So that's basically how we see generally the outlook for this year. And short term, we're going to be dealing with these pandemic uncertainties until they're clearly in the past. But as we start going through, looking at the vaccines, we're going to be starting to ask questions. Okay, as the vaccine rollout starts, what's the economy going to look like later this year and more specifically in 2022? And the way we sort of phrase that is, to what extent will the pandemic leave scars on the economy? And more specifically, what sectors are we going to have to rely on in order to, say, kickstart potential growth once again? Because there's a number of developments that are going to hold back potential growth. And that's just if the economy is basically not being hit by shocks, how fast might we expect the economy to grow? And there's some uncertainty over that I'll discuss specifically in a little while. So when we've been watching the pandemic, some of the issues that we're watching are some of the sectors that are being more severely impacted than others. For example, a lot of the labor market impact has been on lower wage cohorts. So when you look at the breakdown of employment since February, and you figure out, okay, how have low wage, medium wage, and high wage cohorts, what's happened with employment? In the low wage category, employment is still down 10% from pre-pandemic levels. In high wage categories, it's up 8%. So what that sort of means is that if you're able to work at home and you're in a relatively high wage occupation, the pandemic might have been an annoyance, but it really didn't affect your economics, your household economics. If you're in a low wage category, you've been going through periods of uncertainty and volatility and unemployment. And so you certainly see that there's that split there. And to the extent that that split lingers when the vaccines come out, that's going to have an impact on how the Canadian economy is going to grow going forward. We need basically to get better growth opportunities at the low wage categories and some prospect for those people to move up into medium wage or high wage. And that sort of drives the dynamism for the economy, the dynamism for the housing market. So we can't have an economy that leaves those people behind. You could extend that to say, not only is it low wage workers, it's youth. Youth have been hit very hard during this pandemic. So we can't have an economy that's going to grow if youth are going to be falling behind, because we need the youth to come in, get those first jobs, get the experience, and then move up into other occupations. So we need basically to have that vibrant job growth for youth as well. There's also another breakdown that we've seen with minorities. And again, that partly is the wage-based background that racial minorities are lagging versus other categories of other cohorts of the economy. You can't have a vibrant, growing economy if we have these people lagging behind. And the last one is obviously women. Now, with women, it's not necessarily showing up in the employment numbers. If you look at the employment numbers, it looks like women have bounced back relatively well. But if you look at the labor force participation, what you see is that women are lagging. Many times it's the women in households that are required to do more of the family health issues. And so what you tend to see is that women who are facing these challenges potentially of labor uncertainty, potentially income uncertainty, and they're facing requirements to take care of somebody in their household, it's the women who basically end up having to make that decision. So, but again, this sort of shows that even though we see the vaccine coming and economic growth returning later this year, there are certain key elements within the society that suggest that, okay, in order for us to think that the pandemic is really past and the economy is moving on and things are getting better, certain groups need to see their economic backdrop improving. So those are things that we're going to be watching quite closely going forward. Now, another aspect that we focus on is going to be, and this is going to be very relevant to potential growth going forward and the ability of the economy to grow, is immigration. Obviously, the pandemic and the restrictions on the pandemic have cut immigration quite sharply from where it was before, and it's well below the federal government's targets for bringing in immigrants. So the federal government has a plan to increase the number of immigrants relative to what they'd planned pre-pandemic in order to hopefully catch up. So we'll be watching for that immigration. And that becomes important in Canada because that immigration over the past few years is what drove a lot of the employment growth over the last few years. The natural rate of growth of the population in Canada has been declining over the past decade or so. So a lot of the growth in population, a lot of the growth in the labor force, a lot of the growth in employment has come from immigration. So it's the idea, if we want to have an economy with growing potential, we need to get that immigrant population returning. So how is that going to happen post-pandemic, and how are we going to accelerate the rate of immigration, and what are we going to do to make sure that those immigrants integrate well into society to make best use of the skills they're going to bring into the economy. And that brings up to one other point that could be relevant in the discussion you have today, and that is, given the need we're going to have to pick up the pace of potential growth in Canada. What that means is we have to make the best use of all of the skills of the people coming into Canada and that are in Canada. So if we have gaps in the labor force, for example, as I mentioned, with youth, with women, with low-wage workers, we have to figure out a way to make sure that we're getting the most out of those cohorts and growth going forward. And when we think in other aspects, we also have to make sure that in Canada, we focus specifically on innovation and getting the most out of all groups in Canada at the present time. So that means that any group that might have been historically, say through a lack of funding or for whatever reason, held back, or that we haven't been getting the most out of them, we need to focus specifically on making sure that we get as much out of those groups and make the best use of their skills. That would go into the statements that were made earlier by your president in terms of Black-led businesses having been lagging behind other businesses in terms of financing and other issues. It would suggest that if we want the economy to get back or to get on track for faster potential GDP growth, we need to get the most out of all groups, including Black-led businesses, in order to make use of the skill set that's in those groups and take as much benefit from the diversity of those groups in terms of boosting growth. Now, I'm going to quickly go through a couple of other developments that we're watching. In Canada, one of the great things in Canada that's been going on, and more than in most other countries, has been the response of the federal government. Now, there have been some criticisms for the federal government, but from my perspective, when I look at what the federal government did, given the shock of COVID, the job losses, the federal government didn't let grass grow under their feet. They responded quickly and aggressively in order to replace the lost income. That ended up having a very important impact last year, because usually when you would get hit by a shock like we saw, unemployment goes up, as we saw, but disposable income goes down. People have trouble making payments. People end up seeing their mortgages falling behind. Maybe some people fall behind on credit as well, and some people might lose their houses. That didn't happen in Canada. We had mortgage deferrals. We had the CERB program, which has now become the Canada Response Benefit. So we had this replacement of lost income and deferral of credit payments. That provided a very important cushion for the economy. Now, one of the challenges we're going to face this year is actually going to be, as some of those programs mature, mortgage deferrals run off, we're going to start seeing this year more people having difficulty with their finances. What we have to realize is that the federal government is going to be there to provide underlying support, and it's not going to be as big of an issue as it might have been last year. And the fiscal response in Canada was larger than any other country. So that really sort of shows you that even though we have discussions about whether or not the federal government has done enough, the Canadian federal government, in conjunction with the provincial governments, provided more stimulus than any other country, major industrialized economy. And quickly, an outlook on interest rates. Bank of Canada will be having a meeting tomorrow. I don't think they're going to do anything specific to change their outlook, but it's important to focus that what the Bank of Canada is going to do is they're going to recommit to leaving interest rates extremely low. Many other central banks are doing the same thing. And while some people say this is an inflation risk, I'm not worried about that. I think the central banks realize that they need to keep interest rates low to do as much as they can to spark economic activity from the household sector or from the business-led sector in order to sort of get some activity and pick up economic activity, whether it being companies doing hiring or companies doing investment. Now, with regard to small businesses and some of the uncertainty that small businesses might face, in an environment of low interest rates, also in an environment where we've got the economic uncertainty due to the pandemic, companies have to realize, whether it's 1,000 people or 10 people, companies have to realize that they can't turn inward and become cautious because of what's going on. If you see opportunities or you see the possibility of opportunities in the future, you have to move quickly in order to take advantage of them. And for a lot of companies in Canada, that means that you have to make up your investments. Now, we've seen some investments in the retail sector. The retail sector got caught having not made many advancements in online presence or in computer technology. So given the pandemic and the lockdowns, they had to respond quickly. Everybody has to sort of think that way. You can't wait for a crisis. You have to say, if there's an opportunity, we need to make an investment. We need to do that investment as quickly as possible to integrate it and be able to take advantage of economic growth once it returns, rather than waiting for things to get better, then deciding to make an investment. So it really does put this need on all cohorts and all segments in Canadian society that with low interest rates, with the vaccine coming, eventually going to create that herd immunity and getting back to growth, companies have to realize that they have to take advantage of the opportunities to invest in machinery and equipment, to improve their people, processes, and technology now in order to take advantage of the opportunities that are going to be arising in the relatively short future. And that is basically the most of my comments. So I'll turn it back over and we can do some Q&A from this perspective.
Well, I thank you very much, Dave. I thank you for your insights. You gave us some powerful nuggets. But before I start going to some of my questions, I want to put it out there to the audience. If you have a question you would like to present or you would like to be shared, feel free to either raise your hand in the group or you can actually type out your question in the chat which is at the bottom of your screen. All right, so we're going to be going into this session now. David, let me ask you a question. Somewhat you made a few references there. And you said that, yes, as part of this is now's the time to pivot as an organization if you're a small-led business. Where have you seen industries which may have an upturn or may be expanding in this industry? In this time, post-COVID time, do you see an industry segment or a stopgap that's really emerging?
Well, there are several of them. You can see the biggest impact for COVID has certainly been on service industries.
Yeah.
And so what you've certainly seen is a number of service industries that have had to rethink. Uh, this is our traditional role. Well, I'll say retail, like groceries is a good example. Uh, Groceries have had a typical, you just stock the shelves, people come in, they buy stuff and they leave. In the world of COVID, they suddenly realized, well, that sort of business model doesn't work as well as it used to because we can't get the same people into our stores. So what do we do? And you saw them make large investments in online technologies. And whereas retail companies like groceries, but retail in general in Canada had lagged a lot of other countries around the world in terms of their investment in online technology, we were caught flat-footed. So they've had to catch up. So you've had this idea that what we used to think of grocery and retail, well, in Canada, it used to be more bricks and mortar. And now we're catching up to the rest of the world where a lot of it is more online. So we've got a lot of companies in Canada that had been sitting back, quite comfortable with the bricks and mortar backdrop, now realizing we need an aggressive online presence if we're going to catch up. And so you've certainly seen a quick change in those industries. Any other industry and any other service industry that usually relied heavily on, say, high touch. So people coming into your store, people coming into your service, people coming into your company, have had to rethink how they provide their service. And I think that's actually useful because what that actually means is that while they have been specifically squeezed because of the COVID restrictions, it should actually show any industry that you have to think about, okay, is the manner in which we're satisfying our customer demand the best we can do? Or are there other opportunities out there? Especially now with the advent of communications technologies, and we're going towards 5G. There might have been companies that would be saying, well, we're doing okay, so 5G is interesting, but we're not going to make the huge investment just yet. We'll wait. You can't do that sort of thing anymore. You've got to stay on top of what it is that you're providing to your clients, what it is that makes you unique, and then making sure that you advance with technology in order to provide your services to your clients and make sure that they continue to value the service or the product that you're producing. And it really does mean that for companies and for businesses or for individuals, you have to constantly go back and rethink, okay, what's my business case? What is it that I think I'm providing to people? And then actually going out and talking to clients and going, okay, here's what I think I'm doing. What do you think I'm doing? And then it might, by having those sorts of conversations, you might actually realize, well, I've got a huge missed opportunity. If that's what they think they're doing, that I'm providing to them. If I make a modest change to my workflow, I can actually provide a much better service. And that's specifically on the service side. I mean, on the manufacturing side, you've got that as well. How many distillers shifted to making PPE? So they didn't see an opportunity before, now they did. And then going forward, you're going to constantly see these opportunities where something we didn't consider to be a viable option for our business in the post-pandemic world is, and you have to stay flexible, keep your finger on the pulse of what your customers want in order to be able to provide their product or the services in the most efficient way possible. And it really is going to create very, I'll say, flexible opportunities for many businesses, but you have to respond quickly, specifically nowadays, because in the past you might have been able to say, I'll fly out to Calgary and visit my clients. You can't really do that as much now. And even when we get back to the regular world, I think we're going to be much more reliant on Zoom technology or these technologies for communications. So you have to have a very strong idea what it is that you're providing to clients and make sure that you're doing it the best that you can in order to take advantage of the opportunities that will arise.
Fair enough. Well, so let me piggyback on that then. If you're saying they have to pivot quickly, given the current environment, and I believe that to be true, a lot of that pivoting or adopting or changing causes or needs access to funding.
Yes.
With that said, is the government or from an economic perspective, is there going to be an initial or a re-looking of how funds are loaned to organizations to help them pivot given this? Do you see that coming through? And if so, where would you see that be most easily adopted?
Do I see it? That I can I say, do I see it? I can't say that I do see it, but from the same perspective, it's necessary. And I would say that, but it's been necessary for years and it hasn't been necessarily forthcoming. I think that what the pandemic has done is it showed some of the inefficiencies in the funding markets that we've had, some of the areas that we need to get more out of and the lack of funding that has been there. And the federal government, a number of the programs that they put out showed just how vulnerable certain segments of the economy were to this small decrease in funding or a small decrease in activity, how vulnerable they were. And so the federal government has been bringing out some programs to help support some of these sectors that some of these funding of some of these organizations and that we didn't know were vulnerable. So I would say the government to an extent now recognizes some of the vulnerabilities in the economy. But from the other perspective, there are also other areas where we desperately need underlying support. When we think about innovation and research and development, especially early stage funding for innovation and research and development, that has been a lacking in Canada for years. We've been clamoring for the government to sort of step up with programs to support innovation and research and development at the earliest stage with grants as opposed to loans. They've had programs set up where all of the risk of innovation and research and development was on the company or the individual themselves. At the end of it, they could apply for some funding. But that was complicated because companies would need funding to get through that. So we need the early stage funding for innovation and research and development. And the way I've sort of phrased it for the government nowadays is to say, if your plan is to engage in this shift from, say, an economy based heavily on industries that produce heavy greenhouse gases to an economy which is based on clean technology, it's not going to be an easy transition. It's not necessarily going to be a smooth transition. So the government has to fund the research and development and the innovation in order to go through the process of that shift. So the government seems to realize, okay, we need to put in place funding to help finance innovation, research and development, getting the most out of all different cohorts of industries, supporting the industries that are potentially very valuable, but which actually are quite vulnerable in terms of their funding, in order to make sure that our economy goes from strong growth to strong growth, and we build up the potential growth of the economy rather than going through a period of very sluggish and slow growth that is not going to be good for anybody. So the government, I would say, does seem to recognize that, and we'll find out in their budget how serious they are about doing that.
Okay, fair enough. We have a question coming straight from our vice president there. I'm sorry, Michael Pinnock has a question for you. Michael, you're on mute. Unmute your mic, please.
Sorry, thanks. So thanks for the presentation thus far, David. As I look through my notes, I recognize that you didn't mention much about the debt. The federal government has given us tremendous support. And I think as you see, we're in a low interest rate regime now, and it may persist for a little while. But I don't know what the debt balance is right now and what impact that may have as we get out of the pandemic and start to see some growth, and what effect that may have on the low interest rate regime and for our particular environment where we're getting into probably investing by getting loans to leverage our business. What impact you think the debt may have as we try to pay it down?
You're right. I did overlook that issue, and it's one because it can get quite complicated. Or I try to keep it simple, but it can be quite complicated. The one thing I will say is that for Canada, since 2009, so basically since the prior recession, the global financial crisis, we've relied heavily on households and companies to borrow to support growth, and provincial governments. And so a lot of the growth we ended up seeing over those last few years was basically borrowing for investment in the oil sands, borrowing for investment in residential real estate, and that really did carry the economy. The one segment of the society which was not borrowing heavily was the federal government. And so what happened with this financial crisis, or with the current crisis, was, and even before we really started to see how severe it was, we started arguing that in Canada, if there is one group who could carry the burden of the fiscal burden of the cushioning the economy from the pandemic, it was the federal government. We couldn't rely on households because they were generally already heavily indebted. We couldn't rely on businesses because their profit outlook was uncertain and they were already heavily indebted. The provincial governments were heavily indebted and their credit rating was less than the federal government. So we didn't want provincial governments borrowing heavily. But the federal government had a lot of room to carry the fiscal response. And to their credit, they stepped up and did an aggressive support. Now, from that point, what that means now in Canada, households, corporations, provincial governments, and federal governments are all heavily indebted. Recent numbers suggest that Canada might be as heavily, if not more heavily indebted in terms of GDP than Japan. And Japan has always been the example of the economy which has had the highest level of debt. So we are now a high debt economy. So if interest rates start to go up, we face challenges. So I'll set that as the initial stage. Now, for the federal government, not only is it good that they insulated the economy from the pandemic, now we start looking forward. So we've already got this high level of debt. What do they do going forward and how do they manage that debt? If interest rates are set to stay low, and our forecasts are that long-term interest rates will stay low, the government has to basically shift its focus from cushioning the impact of the pandemic to, say, investing in growth. So we need to make sure that the government is supporting, say it's whether it's infrastructure investment, although they've done that to an extent, or investment in innovation and research and development in order to boost long-term growth in the economy. And if we can keep the level of growth above the level of interest rates, it'll work out. It's not going to be the most comfortable situation, and there will always be risks if inflation spike. If interest rates spike. But so long as we can use the government funds going forward to invest in boosting growth and keeping growth above the level of interest rates, we can manage the level of debt. But as you sort of, with the question itself, there is a worry there that if inflation takes off and interest rates go up, we are going to be vulnerable to increasing debt payments and probably one of the most vulnerable economies in the world. But the conditions that we look at right now is that long-term interest rates are set to remain low for several years, which buys us time to put in place policies to help support a higher level of growth and allow us to manage that debt. But so I'm not excessively worried about it now, and given the conditions that we see going forward, but it is certainly something that in the backdrop makes me somewhat nervous. But I would rather have the federal government carrying that debt than households, households, non-financial firms, and provincial governments at the present time.
Incidentally, just a follow-up, Anton.
Yep.
From where I sit in the role I like to play in the BBP, and as we try to help, the small, mid-sized companies, I try to focus on some absolute quantitative number. So I'm not certain if you're cared to make a projection on, what you think interest rates. We keep saying it's low, but if you're coming from 8% and you're down to 70, it might be considered low. But if you're coming from 5% and you're down to, 0.75%. So I don't know what is sort of absolute interest rate we're looking at, what sort of inflation you may have in mind, and what sort of growth you may anticipate. So as we do our own planning and try to help our business, we can say these are the numbers we're working towards because they are, the best forecast we have at this time.
Yeah, I'll say in general, the idea is that I think inflation is going to stay relatively low for the next several years. So the Bank of Canada's forecast is 2%, or not forecast, pardon me. The Bank of Canada's target is 2%.
Yeah.
And so I tend to think, okay, I'm not going to put a lot of effort into forecasting long-term inflation. I'll just assume right now that 2% is probably where it's going to be. The bank would probably like to be in a situation where they have to worry about inflation being too high, because that would mean that we're past this pandemic. But I usually just say, if we're going to focus where inflation will be, say take 2%. I would say over the next several years, the risks are probably going to be tilted more to the downside of that than to the upside of that.
Okay.
And then the question is, okay, after that, the next important variable for determining what might happen to interest rates is potential GDP growth. And potential GDP growth used to be around 2.5% to 3%. Then it came down closer to 2% to 3%. Right now, potential GDP growth might be slightly below 1%, given some of the pandemic shocks. So, and so you would say, in the long term, where would you expect interest rates to go? Say that 10-year bond yield, where would you expect it to go? So somewhere between 2% and 3% long term.
Okay.
But I don't think that that's where it's going to be for a long period of time, because beyond that question, you've also got what's going on globally. And globally, interest rates are being held down. And I think that's going to be a situation that keeps these long-term interest rates, 10-year bond yields, probably between it's below 1% now. And I would say probably between 1% and 1.5% for the next 1.5 to 2 years. And say from the Bank of Canada's perspective, rates are 0.25, the policy rate. And I think it's going to stay there through most of 2022, if not into 2023. And one other aspect about that is the Bank of Canada also wants to see long-term interest rates stay low right now. They know that it might cause people to borrow. We're seeing that in the housing rate, and they're concerned to an extent about people borrowing too much. But the Bank of Canada's quantitative easing program is actually designed right now to sort of keep its foot on longer-term interest rates, and that will remain in place and likely and well into this year and possibly into next year. So that suggests at least another year of low longer-term interest rates, because if the Bank of Canada sees rates there starting to rise, they will sort of step on long-term rates with more aggressive quantitative easing.
Right. So as we're in the mid-size black-led space, and you mentioned earlier about the opportunities that will be there in another couple of months, and as we pivot, we could think about leveraging, because the interest rate will be relatively low, and we should to go borrow to take use of the opportunity that's coming down the road. That is something we could actually push with our folks.
Like I always say, you have to make sure that you keep, no matter whatever interest rates are, you have to make sure that you take into consideration your ability to borrow and carry debt. So don't say that interest rates are low, we should borrow. Just go, I see an opportunity here, I need to make an investment, and it is an investment. So can I carry the cost of funds while I put this investment in place, and the impact it might have on my bottom line, so that I can finance it long term? Yeah, I think now is the opportunity to start going, okay, if you see those opportunities, getting more aggressive about making those investments, because and the one thing that sort of holds you back isn't the financing costs, it's, is this the right time to do it? Do I want to do that now when I've got a period of economic uncertainty? What if we have another pandemic downturn? What if something else happens? And so you put off that decision. You say, okay, we're not going to do it this quarter, we'll do it next quarter maybe. Next quarter, something else happens, we'll put it off to the next quarter. Then you end up not making the investment, or when you see the opportunity, your competitors have already made those investments and they're ahead of you. So it's the idea, if you see those opportunities, don't get that baffled by the period of uncertainty. Realize that you've got to look through that to the long term and make the best decision you can for your company. And that usually means that when things are the most uncertain is the time to make those decisions, because that is the time when you can sort of make the investment, make the change in your business strategy, and you have time to work out the kinks so that when things begin to improve, you're firing on all cylinders, as opposed to then trying to sort of go through the growing pains.
Thank you. I'll just take a break so someone else may, if they're in the chat for question. But I've got one last question I want to ask at the back end.
Okay.
No worries, Mike. We'll come back to it. Thank you for your question. We always have a great way of engaging the audiences. Well, let's make a quick shift and go to Fauzia. Fauzia Mohammed, please unmute your mic and go ahead.
Thank you so much, Anton. Thank you, David, for all the valuable input. I just had a question in regards to what you were talking about around the pandemic and the vaccines.
Yep.
You know, within the Black community, there's a lot of misinformation around the vaccine, and there might be hesitancy around taking the vaccine, especially for those who have immunocompromised patients or who have immunocompromised conditions who are unable to develop immunity following the vaccine. I know with the current pandemic, there were some concessions with the CRB, but for those who are Black, low income, and who are also having immunocompromised conditions who would not benefit from taking the vaccine and it might be detrimental to their own health, is there any concessions in place to support those types of patients, you know, because of their intersectionality of Black, low income, and also having a chronic condition? Also, do you see any trends in regards to those who don't take the vaccine? What will be happening in terms of their employment or status? Because I know that there is no right now regulation in place, but there might be in the future some type of social pressure if those who don't take it, you know, for various reasons. Yeah, those are the main two questions, especially for patients who have immunocompromised patients or conditions. What are some type of concessions in place? Is there any regulatory supports in place for those types of patients who will be vulnerable in this certain situation that they're placed in? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. That one could go. I could go talk for a while on that one. Some of those things I don't necessarily have resonance with me on a day-to-day basis. So, but I can provide some insight onto them. This pandemic has obviously sort of shown some of the vulnerabilities that we have, say long-term care homes, some of the issues there. So we're going to have to do something with to reform how we treat long-term care homes and the regulations. One of the other big issues is actually with regard to childcare. We've seen a definite need that we need better national childcare system, because when the pandemic happened, a lot of women have now been forced effectively out of the labor force because they have to deal with childcare or other home care issues. So that's sort of exposed. Okay, this is a vulnerability for the economy that we've sort of known about, but let it go for years because it didn't really sort of hit the economy in the face, whereas now it has. So we've got issues with long-term care homes, issues with the national child care policy. And again, we're also seeing some of these people self-employed, people in the gig economy, who now we're seeing just how tenuous their employment backdrop was, and that if their income slows down, they get hammered, and they weren't necessarily part of the regular unemployment insurance system. So now we've seen the vulnerability that we've got there. So they're starting to bring in programs to make sure that people who are self-employed, people who are in the gig economy, to an extent have some backdrop in case they go through periods of unemployment. So these are all, like, when you stack them all up, there's huge issues that sort of show just how vulnerable the economy was, that we sort of let it go. And I'd say to the credit so far, the federal government has stepped up and said, okay, look, we've seen a number of vulnerabilities and we're going to put in place at least a temporary program to get us through it. The challenge is going to be coming up with permanent programs to support some of these groups. I don't necessarily know that I've gone over specifically the ones that you've mentioned, but a lot of those groups where we've now seen that there are vulnerabilities, the federal government has recognized it. And then it's the idea, okay, how do we put in place the structure that doesn't discourage people from participation in the economy, but does provide that underlying degree of assurance that if something bad happens, you're not going to fall through the cracks. And I would say and the ones that I've already mentioned, the ones that you've mentioned, you can see how big a program that is that the federal government is going to have to go through over the next, and it'll probably take a couple of years to really design the best system that they can. But I would say to an extent, a lot of these groups that had more vulnerability than we might have anticipated, they are recognized, and the federal government is trying to do with a number of programs, provide support mechanisms going forward. On the vaccine issue, the hope is that we get that 50 to 90% herd immunity by Q3. We know that there are going to be people who can't get the vaccine, people who don't want to get the vaccine. We haven't focused as much on whether or not that will be a hindrance to the economy. Certainly, and then to what extent that might, I don't see things like widespread. If you don't have a vaccine, you can't come into work. I don't see that on a widespread basis. But I could see a number of companies that would be in a situation of, if you don't want to get the vaccine, since you've been working at home potentially, you can continue to work from home. Because now we've got this idea that for a lot of companies that rather than going through the process of trying to officiate whether or not their employees have gotten the vaccine, they'll sort of go, look, we only need 50% of our staff in office any particular day. So if you want to work from home, whether it's vaccine related or not, if you just want to work from home, you enjoyed it after the past year and you actually found that you're more productive there. If you want to work from home, continue to work from home. So I think that sort of does provide businesses the ability to regulate some of the, at least some industries, some service industries, regulate the idea that if people don't want the vaccine or don't want to come into work, even if you've got the vaccine, maybe you don't want to go through public transit every day like you did before, because you're just, even though you've had the vaccine, you're still nervous. So I think that we do have a number of businesses that will set up more flexible work arrangements to deal with that, whether or not it's directly related to the vaccine. But there will be some people that there will be some tensions, and they'll get a lot of focus in the media and that. But I don't think it's going to be a huge issue holding back the economy per se.
Thank you.
Okay, and last question. Thank you so much for that question, Fazia. Last question, it comes from Francesca. Francesca's question is, make sure I get the correct answer. Francesca Serwa, in regards to the federal government priorities, when it comes to immigration, how will this impact the Canadian economy, its GDP, and building small businesses?
Well, I sort of said during the presentation that immigration has been one of the most important sources of growth over the last several years. Immigration has accounted for the increase in the labor force, and it's accounted for much of the increase in employment. So when we think about going forward, if the economy is going to grow, we're going to create jobs. We need immigration in order to have that job growth going forward. And so what we've seen with the pandemic and the restrictions on economic activity and cross-border travel is immigration has fallen sharply. So now once we get the vaccine, we will start seeing immigration begin to increase once again. And the federal government has basically said, okay, well, the assessment that they've done has been, okay, do we get immigration just back to the level that we'd anticipated? And the federal government had a plan for the level of immigration to increase each year. And so that would increase labor supply, build in this increase in employment, and support growth and support potential growth. And what the federal government has done is it's announced targets that actually have increased the level of planned immigration over the next several years. So unfortunately, I don't have the numbers on my fingertips. I believe it's like 450 going up to 470 and then up to 490,000 over the next 3 years, which is higher than it was before. And it's the federal government's idea that immigration has been a key driver of labor force and employment growth. So if we want to have a growing economy, we have to have immigration not only increase, but accelerate relative to what we'd initially intended. And that certainly is one of the key drivers and the key focuses that the federal government has. On top of that, from my perspective, I think that's a good plan because we should have, and we used to have, immigration, which was about 1% of GDP, 1% of the population each year. And then we fell well below that threshold. So getting it back up to that 1% or above 1% in order to bring in those people with those skills in order to help support growth is crucially important if we want to support economic growth. And on top of that, we have to make sure that the immigrants that do come in integrate as smoothly into the labor force to make the best use of their skills, because we can't have high skilled individuals coming into Canada and then putting them in low skill or low wage occupations. We need to, if we bring in high skilled individuals from another country, we have to make sure that our system puts them into a high skill occupation that matches with their skill set in order to help get the most out of the skills that we're bringing in, and in order to support an increase in potential growth for the economy.
David, we thank you so much. That was actually phenomenal feedback you actually provided us and gave some good insight.
I think there's one more question, isn't there? I think.
Was there another question? I didn't see it. I didn't see that.
Well, it's okay, David, because we're running out of time, so it's okay.
Okay.
I actually wanted to put you on the spot to identify specific industries that you think we could go into, especially in this COVID environment. I think you did mention earlier the service and so on, but based on the numbers that you see on a daily basis, would there be specific areas that would suggest, that we go into that in this uncertain times, we are certain that we'll be successful?
That one's I'd have to take more thought on that one, so I will actually defer on that. So.
All right, thanks anyway.
No worries.
All right, thank you very much.
Listen, everybody, I thank you guys for coming here. We're going to do a quick poll to get some of your feedback. So we're going to put on the screen. I'm going to ask you to do a quick response to get your response. As the question is going to come up as we speak. Question 1. Are you an aspiring entrepreneur? Yes or no? And you can respond below. Question number 2, are you a business owner? And question number 3, what is your age group? Question 4, what topics are you most excited about? Select as many as applies. Question 5, what is your gender? And question number 6, on a scale from A to F, what grade would you give yourself in terms of your knowledge of finance and funding? Last question is, what is your education level? As we wrap up that final session, I thank you guys for your response. I just want to give a quick few announcements as we are quickly running out of time. And I'm about to turn it to Nadine after that, our president. I'd like to thank RBC, HSBC, and the Donald Reed Estate for our partnership with this program. I also would like to announce a few programs. The BBPA is working hard to support our community. There will be a program coming on, Ask the Professional, tomorrow, coming on at 12 o'clock. And it will Loblaws, a day in the life of Loblaws. Further on Saturday, we'll have it in the community space, financial literacy for Black youth, as we explore the love of the fine lodgement and selecting a banking partner. And next week, as part of a continuation of this program, we will have Paul Boudry, Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, for a private briefing on the latest monetary policy report. This will further add some context on where the market is going and what Black businesses need to be mindful of. I'd like to thank everyone for coming so far. And at this moment, I'm going to turn it over to our president, Madam Nadine Spencer.
Thank you very much, Anton, for doing a great job as always. I want to also mention that tonight we have the BBPA Boss Women Entrepreneurship Training Program. It's at 7 o'clock, so please join us there. Thank you so very much, David. I had a lot of comments, but we've ran out of time. But I would love to invite you back.
Hopefully all good.
At the end of the year to talk about, so this is the beginning of the year and we talked about sort of the projections and what we imagine in 2021. But would love to have you back at the end of the year in December, maybe just to sort of look at, where we started and what happened during the year and how do we finish that off. So would love to have you back. I want to thank, I know Kate.
My pleasure.
Yeah, great. And I see Kate is here, Kate Minson from HSBC Bank. An incredible new great partner. Kate and I met over the summer, and here we are now at this initiative with this program. So Kate, I want to thank you also, you and HSBC Bank, for being a part of the BBPA family and for supporting and championing the work we do. I want to reiterate again, all our participants who are here today, thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing you. We have many exciting things planned for this year, and enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you very much.
Again, to everyone, thank you very much, Madam President. Again, this is the first of a 13-week program. Please look forward. I'm looking forward to see you next week. Additionally, please look onto our site, the BBPA, and you will see the additional programs we're also doing to support the community. Together, we can get through this. Together, we're going to new heights. We're working together, working with you. We love to get your feedback. I thank you for your responses. Be prepared to learn, grow, and excel. Again, thank you. Be well, be safe, and until next week, take care.
Thank you.
David Watts, specifically, I'd like to thank you before you left. You provide us a wealth of information, and I do appreciate you as well.
All right, my pleasure. And I look forward to being invited back. So thank you very much.
I look forward to having you back. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, you too. Bye.
I sent it in the chat. Hi, Alson.
Hey.
Hey, Mike.
Hey. I think this was a very good one. I had a count of about 65 folks in the chat, so.
I counted 69, but we'll do the numbers, but.
Yeah, but I know Tanisha will have the real official
numbers
count, and let's try to keep this core folks engaged as we roll forward, because I really would like to make it a certificate program, and if we have the 80% participation and so on, we can issue some certificates at the end of the end of this program.
Absolutely.
Ah.
So I'm going to leave the meeting now because I also have another, it's such a packed day, but Anton, thank you very much. Michael, as always, thank you very much. Tanisha, fantastic, thank you. I see our membership director here as well, Roderick, thank you very much. And I see Rebecca, good to see you, and Marcia and Davia and Roshiana, and Fevin and Patricia, and our awesome Tanisha and Martine, good to see you. And Michael Bailey, good to see you. And Nardon, thank you guys. We'll see you again next week. Tell a friend and tell a friend, tell a partner and another partner, tell a colleague and another colleague, and we'll build a big, vast tribe here, okay? Thank you, everyone.